It was as remarkable a sight and sound as you would expect with anyone who, as they say, leads with a heart of fire but with a head of ice. This is about what it sounded like as Mr. Parks moved with a purpose toward Justin. Hold it. Stop. Justin. Stop. Stop music. Hello and welcome to episode 30 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of September 16th, 2024. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world and a commemoration of the passing of George N. Parks 14 years on. Using silly stories, memories of actions large and small, and the results of my call to action of the last several weeks of this podcast. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. Just in the last couple of episodes, I've given a nod to the fact that a lot of the content of this podcast series so far has been very UMass Band-centric. Last week, I began the push to diversify my portfolio, if you will, and that will continue. But for the past 14 years, this week, this time of year, this particular Monday, as this episode drops, has been a time during which legions of band people, and in all likelihood a significant portion of my listenership, have been inspired to think upon the life and legacy of George N. Parks. If you need filling in, he passed away unexpectedly on Thursday evening, September 16th, 2010, while leading his Minuteman Band on what could be seen as a band road trip for the ages, from Amherst to Ann Arbor, Michigan, so that on September 18th, when the University of Michigan football team played host to the UMass football team, the Minuteman Marching Band could play pregame and halftime at Michigan Stadium, the big house, in front of something like 100,000 people. Long story very short, the band, following its training, and perhaps inspired by something else besides, continued on that trip, played the gig, and wrote a legendary chapter in the band's history in the process. George Parks was the Minuteman Band's director and a member of the UMass Amherst music faculty for 33 years. He founded the Drum Major Academy. He was drum major of the Reading Buccaneers Drum and Bugle Corps for, 12, 13, 14 years, something like that. He conducted many district and all-state honor bands. He was a member of the Bands of America Hall of Fame. He led the Bands of America Honor Band in 2 Rose Parade appearances. The list does go on. And if you, dear listener, are not an alum of any of those organizations, you may have heard my references to him since this podcast launched back in March, and or many of my trio section interview guests' references to him, and wondered what all the fuss was about. And maybe you even thought, Parks again? In the worlds of volleyball, or knitting, or independent filmmaking, or gourmet cooking, or law enforcement, or architecture, or podcasting, there are titans of the industry, people who make a lasting and far-reaching impression on whatever activity they're involved in, people who inspired other people to make their own marks on the sport, or the art, or the craft, or the vocation, and who are mentioned anytime the question is asked, who got you where you are today? Stories are told, books are written, Klingon opera is sung about them. And a lot of times, if you're outside the particular subject area bubble that person inhabited, you have never heard of them. If you're inside that bubble, it's hard to grasp that somehow the whole world doesn't know who that person is. And if that bubble, that area of interest, is big enough, is diverse enough, you might technically be inside of it, but you might still not recognize the name. You might still not know what all the fuss is about. Our job, the people who do know who that person is to be kind and patient and to understand that not everybody will see what the fuss is about, maybe even after we tell all our stories. But we'll still tell the stories anyway, partly for ourselves, and partly because there really is an outside chance that the stories will paint enough of the larger picture that other people will at least understand why we think that person is or was a big deal, and maybe cut us a break. So, if George Parks is a familiar name, get ready for some familiar stories, and some new ones, quite probably. And if George Parks isn't a familiar name, or if the name rings a bell but you don't know that much about him, hang on and hang in. I hope you'll get to the end of this with a greater appreciation of why I sometimes go on and on about the guy. But first, since the band world is large and contains multitudes, as always, we'll begin with the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. This week, a pair of stories about band traditions. Dateline, Louisville, Ohio. Credit to the writing and reporting of Amy Knapp of The Repository, a newspaper based in Canton, Ohio. The Louisville High School Marching Band has reinvented its traditional greeting after a hand gesture by the band was compared to a Nazi salute. The school announced just before a recent Friday night football game that the band would do away with its traditional greeting. The band had a long-standing tradition of greeting fans in the stands at its performances by saying "Hi," accompanied by a straight, extended arm. In a statement to members of the media, Louisville City Schools Superintendent Michelle Schaefer said that the marching band's recent performance at the Stark County Fair created a, quote, community dialogue after attendees questioned the gesture. Quote, "The gesture resembles a dark time in world history and is extremely offensive to most people." She said that she asked the school district's administrative staff to work with the band director to ensure that an appropriate greeting will be used in the future. Online comments, including from former band members who had taken part in the greeting during their school days, both praised the administration for undoing what some have deemed offensive and criticized leaders for giving in to cancel culture. Some commenters were upset that the administration gave in to those who were complaining. One, replying to the school district's original post, said, quote, "Why is it that the minority always get their way?" Another questioned why the change was made via a major announcement. Quote, "They made a mountain out of a molehill," totally overstated. One band alum commented on Facebook that the change was a long time coming. Quote, "Just because it doesn't offend you doesn't mean it's not offensive. Not everything is political. Grown adults arguing about this and calling the generation weak for catering to other human beings' feelings is crazy to me. It's tasteless and insensitive." Another former member added, quote, "I'm all for acknowledging and evolving. Kindness and respect should come first over tradition every time. I applaud and support the fans who spoke up and the administration for their decision to act." Superintendent of Schools Schaefer asked the community for, quote, "patience and grace from the community while we work through this issue. Our school, like our country, has been and still is a work in progress." Dateline, Tallahassee, Florida. Credit on this curious story to the writing and reporting of Mike McDaniel at Sports Illustrated and to the staff writers of Tomahawk Nation, an online Florida State University community hosted by the sbnation.com website. Florida State University's marching band, the Marching Chiefs, did not play the school's iconic third down War Chant in Florida State's recent 28-13 home loss to Boston College and will not be playing it moving forward in other home games this season, according to a social media announcement from the band. Quote, "The Marching Chiefs and the athletic department have enjoyed a relationship of mutual respect for decades. We regularly meet with our colleagues in athletics to discuss all aspects of the game day experience. Our mutual goal, as it always has been, is to help the team on the field and provide the best environment in college football for the fans. This continues to this day. The Marching Chiefs agreed in 2023 with the football team's request to introduce new music during third down. We believe this was a reasonable request. On third down against Boston College, club-like music was used in lieu of the War Chant, and it appears that will continue to be the case moving forward. The Tomahawk Nation writers said, pointedly, quote, "While the issues unfolding on the field for Florida State football have been the main point of frustration for fans this season, during Monday night's loss to the Boston College Eagles, a new source of irritation arose: the in-stadium experience, particularly the auditory aspect of it. Fans both inside the stadium and watching on TV were subjected to hearing radio hits blasted throughout Doak Campbell Stadium, some inconveniently timed, including Don't Stop Believing playing while down 2 touchdowns, and others sorely outdated, including I Got a Feeling, a song released when most of the students and team were in elementary school. Most frustrating to many Florida State fans was the reduction of the presence of the Marching Chiefs with scripted music taking priority, especially on third down. Critical posts on Twitter included such quotes as, quote, "I feel like the Marching Chiefs have barely played tonight in favor of the pumped-in, loud music," and, quote, "I didn't spend $3,000 plus on the Marching Chiefs Coach Club to hear Miley Cyrus blaring during the game." An official Florida State University statement said, quote, "There is latitude for changes, including opportunities for the Marching Chiefs to play at any time of their choosing other than the mutually agreed upon segments involving third downs or during sponsored elements requiring a PA voiceover. Scripted music is playing during those sponsored elements and on third downs." While FSU also said the audio level for music was not elevated Monday from past games, they plan to tone it down, saying, quote, "We share the displeasure regarding the audio levels. That is being corrected." A brief editorial note from me. Nowhere in any of these accounts, or any other news articles about this issue that I could I find any reference to the reason why the War Chant was removed from the band's stands music playing rotation. Different people have different views of that particular piece of music, and several Twitter posts did express opinions about the War Chant itself, pro and con. But for now, that is not an element of this First Strain news story. And that's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick water break, and on the other side of that, we'll dig into tales of the gentleman known to a great many band people simply as GNP. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, I'm going to try to set the stage for this week's trio section. The trio will be full of stories told in written or verbal fashion by me and by people who answered my desperate call to action in the last few podcast episodes. You got a good George story? They all do, but it might be useful to lay out some context beyond what I tossed out there in this week's opening blast. To set that stage, I'm going to read portions of a blog post that I wrote in mid-September 2015. It was called The Little Things. Here goes. Last week, I found myself thinking in a way that I was pretty sure would cause a few raised eyebrows out there. Just in the last day or so, I've observed that I may not be quite as alone in this as I thought, but last week, I realized that my primary emotion 5 years after Mr. Parks' passing is not sadness. Let me clarify. I miss him, same as anybody else. A fine friend of mine addressed this subtopic not long ago. She wrote on her blog, quote, "It is not grief any longer. It is not yet another stage of mourning. It is not selfish sadness either. It is the realization that we have moved on. We have found ways to emulate him, but we are quiet and pensive because we remember we would much rather have him here, cheering for us so we could exceed his expectations." So with respect to the people who, today specifically and in general, are rightly wrestling with the sadness, when I think of that fabled college band director, now I think promptly of the good stuff. I don't so much think of that awful night, or the next morning when I first heard. Instead, I think of the effect he had on the people he came into contact with. He had plenty of large accomplishments, plenty of big and loud things whose success he was responsible for. And yes, when he would stand up on the narrow concrete grandstand railing at McGurk Alumni Stadium to conduct the UMass Band, thus making a whole lot of people very, very, very nervous, because it's a long way to the ground from there, he made a huge impact on a lot of football spectators who otherwise might not have cared about band. But the most impressive stuff wasn't his mace tossing or his calls for more energy from whatever ensemble he was leading. Instead, what was most impressive, what said the most about him as a human being, what still causes people to park him firmly on a pedestal that few can reach, were the little things. A little while ago, a relatively recent UMass Band alum posted a Facebook crowdsourcing writing prompt. Usually these things are fluffy and come in the form of, "Please post a comment about how we met," or some such. This one was not fluffy, and I immediately thought it could get really interesting really fast. This alum was preparing a presentation about something that inspires me, and chose Mr. Parks. She was hoping that she could solicit a few stories about him from the band alumni community. Pretty safe to assume that the band alumni community wouldn't exactly be stuck for something to say. Indeed, the replies rolled in, and a pattern quickly emerged, a similarity amongst the stories that was not hard to spot. They were stories about little gestures. There were quite a few stories about freshmen whose names Mr. Parks somehow knew as early as the middle of band camp, even from high up on the scissor lift or the scaffolding. Quote, "He had the ability to know you even before you knew the drill." There were stories about being a member of a high school honor band that Mr. Parks was conducting and approaching him during a break to let him know they'd be joining the Minuteman Band the next fall, and at the end of the weekend having him remember, amidst the rest of his responsibilities that honor band weekend, to say, "See you in the fall." There were stories about first-year music majors being pressured by other music faculty members not to march, and then Mr. Parks working quietly behind the scenes to convince those faculty members to dial down the pressure, trying to help keep those first-year music majors from being caught between a rock and a hard place for their entire 4 years of college. There were stories about very small local festival honor bands receiving the same kind of attention and care from Mr. Parks that he gave to major international music clinics. There was one story of a band member stricken during band camp with mononucleosis, and how Mr. Parks had made a phone call to her saying he'd identified a band member in each of her classes who would share their class notes with her, and that he'd assigned an alternate marcher to her drill spot until she was well enough to return to band. There was a story about a music teacher job applicant being offered the job because Mr. Parks took time to call the hiring principal and extol the virtues of his former student, and about how impressed the principal was that Mr. Parks thought that much of his former student to pause during a Drum Major Academy session and make the call. There were stories from band alumni for whom Mr. Parks was the new guy. Those alums freely admitted having not been his staunchest allies early on, but said that Mr. Parks always made a point of keeping in touch, saying hi, hoping all was well, and during lengthier conversations, brushing off their apologies, quote, for their stupidity back in the day, and saying that he understood the situation. So you can perhaps understand that there was a reason why, if Mr. Parks asked band alumni for help with a project, they stepped up. There was a reason why when he suggested to band alumni, and anyone else who couldn't run faster, that all it would take to build a new building specifically for the marching band would be to contribute a couple of dollars every week for 2 years. They ponied up. There was definitely a reason why, in one particular moment of UMass Music Department created institutional stress, when Mr. Parks sent out a note to the band alumni wondering if any of us would like to attend a meeting to show support for the Minuteman Band and its continued existence in its current form, a large number of us not only showed up, we got up and spoke up and let people know exactly what we thought of the department's bright idea to somehow improve the band by reducing its rehearsal time and its performance schedule. In fact, so did one band parent. Hi, Mom. Small editorial note, do not get me started about that night. More than once, there were remarks from those Facebook storytellers to the effect that GNP did more for me than I could ever do for him. Even more recently, another band alum and music teacher has endeavored to invent and publicize a hashtag called #BecauseOfGNP to frame our online remembrances this year, which has taken off like the proverbial rocket, and why not? He wrote, quote, Mr. Parks moved mountains for me, and it is because of him that I get to wake up every day and do what I love. For a guy whose public persona was bigger than life, and very often literally high up off the ground, he did a lot for a lot of people, made a lot of people feel important and taken care of by doing the little things. And after this short pause, as promised, more stories, a few from me, but mostly from a number of people familiar with the general topic. And it's not all serious intonations and reverent murmurings. There's mischief, because there was that too. That's next. This is BandWagon. Okay, let's modulate and get into the trio section. This week's trio section is made possible by people like you. To continue this episode's look into the life and legacy of George Parks, it's about to get irreverent in here, and serious, and fun, because from the late 1970s all the way to the end of the 21st century's first decade, he was like anybody else. Stuff that he did and stuff that happened to him was not one thing or the other exclusively. The stories you'll hear are all over the place, but they do paint a complex yet singular picture, that of a remarkable educator, musician, human being. I'll tell you one story so as to properly frame a couple of other stories that I've been sent. The first time I ever saw the UMass Band in performance was a Saturday in October 1983. I was a high school senior, on leave from Saturday morning band rehearsal thanks to the generous nature of my high school band director, Paul Livingston. Never been to campus before. Thought it would be a few buildings and a lot of cows. That's how little I knew about Amherst. So, my family and I take the morning campus tour. Turns out, lots of buildings, no cows. And then we head into the stadium for the home football game against the University of Maine. The band enters at pregame. Man, that's a lot of band people in one place. They just keep coming. There were probably more than 200 of them. And by my count, more than a dozen tubas, which was more people than were in my high school band's brass section. Halftime rolls around, the band plays its opener, a medley from the musical Godspell, and then launches into a rousing rendition of Earth, Wind & Fire's Let's Groove. All those tubas were playing that bass line from a spread tilt and wail, and I had never heard a sound like that before. The game ends, and predictably, I don't know who won. And then I'm introduced to the concept of a post-game show, a fifth quarter. Football team leaves, band stays, lots of people stay. I get to see the show all over again. Super cool. And at the end of it, the band crashes the stands. That was a new one on me. And I look over from my seat in section 5, down and to the right of anyone in the press box, and I see that a gentleman with a ton of red hair and a red beard, wearing a full Navy 3-piece suit, is conducting the band. They're playing Frank Sinatra's My Way. Wait, they're singing it? Okay, mind further blown. But the man is conducting while standing on the 3-foot concrete rail that separates the walkway at the base of the home grandstand from about a 12-foot drop to the ground below, so if he loses his balance and falls, it's going to hurt. But he doesn't fall at all, ever. Conducts energetically to the end of the up-tempo My Way finish, turns to the crowd, and I can hear his shout from where I'm sitting, like he's daring the crowd not to love that band, and we all do. I think I got to figure out what I can major in here at UMass, because that band needs to be my home for the next 4 years, thank you. But I also remember, as my family car hurtles back east on the Massachusetts Turnpike, that on the podium conducting halftime had stood a blonde woman in a white drum major uniform, conducting just as energetically, and at the end of the Let's Groove feature, she had held up her arms, signaling the band to sustain the last chord in a fermata that lasted for a good long time, so long that she had actually turned to the halftime audience, very blatantly looked at her own wristwatch as if to say, "Think they can hang on for longer? Let's find out." And then had turned back to the band, jabbed her arms up into the air, and in response the band had taken the chord up at least 2 dynamic levels, and they'd been at forte to start with. She was in charge, she was having a blast. When I joined the UMass Band that next fall, I met her. She was a 5th-year student, which happened to music ed majors a lot, I found out, and she had become the student music instructor for the woodwind section, which I and my saxophone were part of. And she is my next storyteller.
Hi, Rob. It's Teresa Murray Davison, class of 1987. As you know, I just retired after 37 years of teaching music. And frankly, I would not have had the most wonderful career that I had if it hadn't been for GNP. Not only did I learn so much from him, but he's what made it possible for me to change my major to music education. I hadn't picked up my saxophone in 2 years when I decided to change majors. And I know for a fact that he must have called Lynn Clock and vouched for me, because Mr. Clock assigned me a lesson. I practiced like crazy and went back the next week and played for him, and he accepted me as a music major. I don't think there's any way I would have been accepted as a music major if GNP hadn't vouched for me. And so, in addition to all the wonderful lessons he taught me, I'm eternally grateful for the recommendation and for his call to Mr. Clock.
Mr. Parks could be nicely persuasive when he needed to be. He was also a remarkable smoother of feathers, even though sometimes he ruffled other feathers, too. That Godspell opener I saw, my first time in Amherst in fall 1983, there's a story about that. Last week, I texted back and forth with my friend Lou Pollock, who was a junior trombonist in the middle of that very halftime show, and he told me a story about it all that I hadn't heard before. Obviously, the subject of the musical Godspell was Jesus Christ and the apostles and the crucifixion story and all that, and I remember watching it then and dimly thinking, state school? How are they getting away with this? At the beginning of the thing, the tubas played a pedal tone and the rest of the band sang, "Long live God," and "Hello, Church and State." Lou added to my knowledge of the events leading up to that field production, most notably the drill, not so much the Stephen Schwartz music or lyrics. Apparently, one of the UMass Band's percussionists had told his father about one of the very last drill sets in the production, one in which most of the band formed a cross, a Christian cross, at midfield, while the color guard created a giant oval around it. And the percussionist's father then insisted that Mr. Parks change the cross on the field. I had known that the cross drill set had been changed. When I saw that opener during that halftime, the top of the cross was there, but closer to the front sideline, the band members had expanded out into a 4-step interval block instead of a tight column. But during postgame, the drill set was the cross again. Lou wrote that the percussionist was Jewish, and he thought it was anti-Semitic to make a cross on the field at a state school. Quote, "I remember we had a meeting of all the Jewish band members, and this percussion kid told us his position, and I don't remember anyone else having an issue with it at the beginning." But the percussionist's father knew a member of the UMass Board of Trustees, and a complaint was sent to the trustees, and it came back down via the university's chancellor to Mr. Parks. One night, not long after that, Lou was walking back to his dorm from the Graduate Research Center, which was a building on the opposite end of campus. He walked past Old Chapel, the building in the center of campus, which was the headquarters for the marching band until the late 1990s, and saw a light shining from Mr. Parks' office window on the second floor. Lou went to check and see what was going on. It was about 1 a.m. Mr. Parks was trying to rewrite the Godspell drill. He was trying to make a giant star in a previous drill set into a Star of David. Lou sat with him for a few hours. They worked together to try to adjust all the dots on the drill page to somehow create that Star of David and then get to the next set without causing all kinds of drill crashes. Exhausted, Mr. Parks finally gave up and made the star form into something that looked kind of like a table. Lou wrote to me that what always endeared Mr. Parks to him was, quote, the amount of effort he put in. He told me while we were working that the cross was never meant to hurt anyone. It was just part of the show. Lou remembered talking to his rabbi about the whole thing, and the rabbi said it was just a performance, and noted that the Hogan's Heroes television sitcom of the late 1960s, early 1970s featured Jewish actors playing the roles of the Nazi characters Colonel Klink and Sergeant Schultz. Anyway, later in the season at one of the big exhibitions that UMass played, Lou remembered that Mr. Parks had returned the cross drill set to its original design. The percussionist who originally lodged the complaint had quit the band, and still, the other band members who were Jewish never had any issues with the drill page. That band has always been full of characters, and Lou was one, and he was one of the first people who seemed perfectly happy to chat with anybody, even this mildly terrified rookie. And at that time, as a freshman, I'd been launched headfirst into a version of band that had a lot of characters and mythologies and such that I had not experienced in my high school band, for whatever reason. For one thing, let's just say that the single tuba player in my high school band was a quiet, reserved fellow whom I did get to know, but not right away, and he was never super comfortable in the limelight. Meanwhile, back in Amherst, it turns out that, generally speaking, the tuba stereotype is wackadoodle, and it is earned. I mean, all the mischief in the world. In retrospect, I'm still amazed that my high school band director was a tuba player because he was nothing like the utter crazies that populated the UMass tuba section. I trust I don't have to go into a lot more detail. But Mr. Parks was a tuba player too, I found out sometime in the middle of my freshman year. I wrestled with that news a bit because he was organized and, yes, energetic, but all business whenever he needed to be. And I couldn't imagine him, well, say, for example, setting off a firecracker that was lodged in a jack-o'-lantern that was placed on the 50-yard line front hash mark about 5 minutes before band rehearsal was supposed to start. That happened. Gavin Reardon, senior tuba player my freshman year, the rehearsal before Halloween, yells clear and bolts for the sideline. Next thing I know, there's pumpkin debris all over the field and everybody's stunned for about 5 seconds, and then we're laughing, although we're checking to make sure Mr. Parks is laughing too. Not certain that he was. I digress, but only because that story had nothing to do with Mr. Parks. But this next one has to do with tubas and Mr. Parks, and I'm telling it. It was my sophomore year band camp, 1985, and it was probably the second day we'd been putting the opener music into the opener drill. The tune happened to be the theme from the movie The Right Stuff, just about 10:30 in the morning, probably. As we went from set to set, assembling that opener, a group of little kids from the nearby daycare center were taking a walk with the adults looking after them. Some were walking, others were riding in strollers. The walk brought them past the intramural fields that we used to rehearse on. They stopped about 200 feet from our front sideline to watch us work. And every time we came to attention with a hut, immediately they all cried, "Hut!" and mimicked our shouts of 1-2 when we put our horns up. 1-2! Just imitating anything they heard. Didn't take us long to get really amused by this. They were just so cute, even from far away. "Hey," said somebody in the band, "those kids are a bunch of tuba mutes." As we all conjured that image in our minds and giggled, Mr. Parks, from up on the viewing tower, came out with a joke that just snowballed. Through his megaphone, which he pointed toward the band and away from the daycare kids, he asked, "Why do they stick little kids in tuba bells feet first?" "I don't know, Mr. Parks, why?" "So you can see the expression on their faces." The band just lost it. A little too much sun, a little too much morning rehearsal fatigue, just a perfect storm of bando silliness as it was, and then he makes that joke. Our senior drum major, Jeff Poulton, was on the podium to conduct the Right Stuff opener, and he couldn't keep a straight face. And then neither could Mr. Parks. Every time they would try to rescue the rehearsal and restart the opener, they would fall over laughing. And then they just gave up. Sent us to lunch early. And for the next at least couple of years, "Tuba mutes" was our catchphrase. Anyway, next story, and this one's not from me. Let's get a little dignified here, maybe. I got an email a couple of weeks ago from a gentleman from whom you have heard, if you've heard the early BandWagon episodes. Tom Carboni sent the very first actual correspondence to heybandwagon@yahoo.com, and he's come through again. Tom was a sophomore baritone horn player during my freshman year, and because for that year only Mr. Parks tried out the idea of having hybrid low brass ranks, trombones, baritones, tenor saxes, marching together, what's the world coming to? I'm sure I met Tom pretty early in my UMass band life. So, Tom wrote this. In 1996, the UMMB marched in the parade celebrating the 350th anniversary of Andover, Massachusetts. Band alumni Susan Kelly Harden, class of 1986, Joan Monaco Carboni, class of 1988, and I brought our young families along to cheer on the band as it marched down Route 28. Mr. Parks was walking on the opposite side of the street from us, but across the road he called us each by name and waved. None of us were particularly active alumni, and the band had turned over twice, but he saw and recognized us anyway. I have always heard that he worked very hard to remember names and faces, but once he did, he never forgot. Tom is right about all that. At band camp registration, Mr. Parks would have members of the student staff take Polaroid pictures of all the new rookies, write their names on the pictures, and then he would memorize it all. There is a photo of me in that registration moment as a rookie, and no, I'm not sharing it in the show notes. My God, I was young. I will not describe what I looked like. And who let me go to band camp wearing that? Instead, let me give you a little background information so that my next story contribution will have a bit of context and make a little more sense. One thing you need to know is that before UMass decided that its football team should play against Division I teams from the Big Ten and SEC, and don't get me started about what a disaster decision that was, UMass had football rivalries with UConn and New Hampshire and Delaware and Boston University and Harvard. The Harvard rivalry was a bit one-sided in that the games were only ever played at Harvard, not in Amherst. Another thing you need to know is that Ivy League schools' bands go in hard for irreverence. They enjoy making fun of anything that isn't nailed down, which includes the schools against which they hurl downfield the oblong projectile, and includes the bands with which they compete upon the halftime gridiron. And one thing you need to know is that in the history of the UMass Band, the 617 area code was a region of great triumphs and also law enforcement with no sense of humor whatsoever where college bands were concerned. Early in his time at UMass, Mr. Parks led the band into the Quincy Market Faneuil Hall Marketplace in Boston for a standstill performance and ended up reportedly getting arrested because the band didn't have the right permit to do that or something. It's one of those stories that has gotten murky over time, but it did inspire the phrase banned in Boston because, for a while, UMass was banned, B-A-N-N-E-D. Anyway, the first weekend of November 1986 was scheduled to be the UMass-Harvard game in Cambridge, and we loaded up and traveled there on a dismal, drizzly morning. Found ourselves a practice field on the Harvard campus, and sure enough, members of the Harvard band found us and called out to us something about safety school. Oh, look, there are the peasants practicing their marching things. Early in the afternoon, we made our way up into the seats at Harvard Stadium, wearing our official UMass band ponchos, which were really just red tarps with head holes and hoods. And can we just pause here and reflect that Harvard Stadium is a wonderful place to watch a football game? It's as if a football stadium and the Roman Forum slammed into each other. Greek columns all around the top level of the place and everything. Great sightlines, very classy. The Harvard band, not so much, then, at least during the game. Among their many cheers, why do they spell it UMass? Because they can't spell university. Anyway, that day was, again, rainy and kind of miserable, and the next weekend, Harvard Stadium was to be the site of a very important event, the Harvard-Yale football game. And it was explained to us that the Harvard folks wanted to keep the field in good shape for that, so therefore neither band would be allowed to march on it at halftime. I know what you're thinking. What was happening during the first and second quarters of the game, and would undoubtedly happen during the third and fourth quarters, and God help us if we went to overtime? Right. Big grunting athletes tearing up the field. We didn't see the logic. But our band was going to be allowed to stand in one end zone and play our halftime show music from underneath the goalposts. We wouldn't be allowed to cross the goal line onto the field, but the end zone would be fine. So we went and stood there and played one tune, and although different people have different memories of some of the details, there is video, and it shows the band in the end zone with about 10 Cambridge police officers spread out along the goal line at about a 6 or 8 yard interval, as if to suggest that no, indeed, the band is not crossing that goal line and going onto the field. And the video shows the band playing to the end of that one halftime tune, And then a couple of cymbal players and a couple of snare drummers and a couple of quad players start to drift toward the goal line between a pair of the police officers, and then Drum Major Jeff goes with them, and then the rest of the band goes with him onto the field, cheering and running and skipping and fairly dancing into the drill set that starts our Stars and Stripes Forever closer, because not a single police officer has made any remote move to try and stop any of us. The video ends there, but we played Stars and Stripes all right, and the UMass fans who traveled to Cambridge, sitting up in the visiting stands, went crazy. Trust me, I was a junior. I was on that field. That storming of the field for a lot of us became known as the Harvard thing, or the thing, or just Harvard. But there are details that I never knew, and my friend Steve Robinson, who was playing snare that day and played snare from 1985 to 1989, picked up the story from there. He wrote me this. I'm sure a lot of us have versions of the day we stormed the field at Harvard, but let me give you two details. During the second quarter, George came through the rows in the stands to tell us all we were not allowed on the field at halftime, and anyone who did go on the field would be arrested. Looking at each of us with those intense eyes, he finished by asking in a slightly different tone and a bit slower, "Do you understand?" The drumline, at least, and I hope others, heard the subtext as, "I can't be a part of it, but you need to do something about this." And so we started planning. Fast forward 10 years or so, presumably beyond any applicable statute of limitations, and through non-band connections, I met a man by the name of Leslie Quinn. It turns out he was one of the bus drivers for the band that day and was sitting on his bus when the thing happened. George ran up to the bus and said, "I need a place to hide." Leslie said, "Sure, come on in." George proceeded to hide himself under garment bags and clothes in the back of the bus. Shortly, a Harvard University police officer came to the door of the bus saying they were looking for George. Leslie said he hadn't seen him, but the officer then asked if he could search the bus. Knowing that refusing would be suspicious and being smarter than your average proverbial bear by a good distance, Leslie said, "Sure, I don't care, but the kids have their personal stuff all over the place back there, so try not to move things around too much." The officer bought the line, gave a cursory glance down the aisle, and moved on. And so GNP was saved from another arrest by a quick-thinking bus driver and a very good friend of the band. Considering some of the silliness of the band put GNP through, it's sometimes remarkable to me, particularly from his arrival at UMass in 1977 through the relatively raucous mid-1980s, that he still was inspired to go to the lengths he did for his band. I'm thinking of one practical joke in particular, that same year as the Harvard thing. At the start of that year's preseason camp, he was teaching or reteaching everybody how to properly execute our attention position, beyond his usual feet together, stomach in, chest out, shoulders back, elbows frozen routine. At one point he said to us, "Now, there's a feeling to that attention position. You want to keep things in your midsection just a little bit taut. Here's a way to think of it. You know how much of a pain in the neck I can be about maintaining good style, good posture, and all that. Now, suppose I give each of you a gift, and that gift is one single marble. And you think, just one marble? What kind of gift is that? You cheapskate. You know where you can stick your marble?" We chuckled, thinking about that location where the sun don't shine. "Well," he said, "for maintaining a good steady attention position, just imagine that I've returned the favor and there is now a marble there. And your job is to clench those muscles just enough to keep the marble in place." We all chuckled again. Ew, gross. But we got the idea. A little glute gripping and you'll have that nice military bearing. Engage the marble muscles, just tightly enough to keep a marble, aloft. So the question became, how is the marble? A couple of nights later, we were gathering for the evening rehearsal outside, on campus, in front of the UMass Fine Arts Center, on a rather vast tract of concrete between FAC and the nearby campus bus stop, just the right size for a standstill rehearsal of a 240-piece marching band. And as we got our instruments and flags and such unpacked, Drum Major Jeff and a few of the field staff came around to everyone and quietly gave each of us something, a gift. During the dinner break, some of the student staff members had gone to a department store somewhere nearby and made a purchase, and we were all given a tiny gift and some instructions. The rehearsal began, and we set up in concert arcs with the color guard over there and the twirlers on the other side of us and the drumline behind the woodwinds and brass, facing the bus stop so that we could properly startle the people stepping off any arriving buses throughout the evening. Mr. Parks climbed on top of an overturned trash can, the poor man's podium, and called us to the ready. And then, "Detail, hut 10, hut!" And then what was heard was the sound of 240 people dropping one single marble each, and all the marbles striking the concrete, according to the call of gravity, over and over. 240 marbles went click, 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 click. I like to think that Mr. Parks was amused. I also like to think it didn't take us too long to pick them all up. But Mr. Parks could create his own version of a mad scramble. Last week, I received an email from Anthony Fors, a UMass drum major during the mid-late 1990s, if I'm not mistaken. He wrote this story down. Around 2006, GNP wanted to go to a Reading Buccaneers alumni corps show and be the drum major. It was the week before UMass band camp, and he needed to finish the pregame drill, so I told him, I'll drive and you write the drill. Quick aside, in true GNP fashion, he'd just bought a Garmin GPS, but he didn't know how to use it. It was set to shortest route and not fastest route, so it was the least efficient trip from Amherst to Reading, Pennsylvania ever. We eventually made it in time for the Friday night rehearsal and dinner. When we woke up Saturday morning, he said, all I have is a uniform top, and the drum major pants need to be white. We need to go to the mall. I said, we're not in Florida, so I'm not sure we're going to find white pants. We went to the mall, and sure enough, he found white pants. Then we got to the stadium, and he said, they're wrinkled. We didn't have an iron in the car, so I looked at him and asked what we should do. He decided to go door to door to the surrounding houses until he found someone that could help. By the 10th house, he found someone and sat on their front porch proudly as his pants were being ironed inside. One of the many examples of him willing positive results against the odds. My experience of Mr. Parks was that he was an intense guy who enjoyed a funny moment, but not at the wrong time. I remember during my freshman year seeing him staring down someone. I don't remotely remember the context, but that someone had tried to make light of the situation when making light of the situation was not remotely a good idea. And Mr. Parks stared at him and hissed, we are not into humor right now. And indeed, none of us who were nearby were at all into humor in that moment. So during my senior drum major year, I had a little tentative moment of, is this the moment when I die? It was at the end of the morning of senior day, out on the intramural fields, and Mr. Parks called out to us all, set up post-game for the last time. Not for the last time ever, but there were parents standing on the sidelines, so it was a fun thing to shout. As everyone scrambled to get ready, I was dutifully running pell-mell along the sideline as I tried to avoid the similarly frantic members of the front percussion ensemble setting up all their toys. My foot caught on a pile of props and things, and I was launched headlong to the ground. My position was supremely undignified. I was prone, face sideways, and all manner of people either trying to rescue me or just shaking their heads sadly at me. Oh, Rob. And that indignity was compounded by the identity of the object that I had managed to take a sizable chunk out of while tripping over it. The red plastic megaphone, which GNP had used during rehearsals since before I joined the band, was lying by the base of the viewing tower, its bell cracked in a few places, a fragment of plastic some distance away, and the built-in siren emitting the most god-awful siren wail. The siren activation toggle switch was stuck in the on position, and it was howling like a car alarm triggered by a passing drumline. Would not stop. To his credit, Mr. Parks didn't use those laser beam eyes of his on me. In fact, he went with the general sense of final rehearsal silliness that had been in place that morning. He asked that it be brought up to him so that he could inspect it firsthand. Then, to the delight of the assembled band, he pitched it over the side of the tower and away from all of us. The megaphone arced out over the auxiliary field and landed with a rather glorious crunch. One of our alumni equipment-moving helpers, Paul Corazzini, retrieved the debris and discovered that although it was now handle-less and completely bell-less now, the megaphone still worked. You could still speak through it. I dubbed it the megaphone they could not kill, after determining that GNP wasn't going to kill me. Anyway, 2 more stories for you in this trio section, stories that bear more than a passing resemblance to each other, and not at all to some of the crazy tales you've heard in the last several minutes. This first one was sent to me by Sonia Elliott, who, while she was marching from fall 1992 to fall 1995 at UMass, was known by her maiden name, Sonia Poulin. She wrote this. At the end of my junior year, a day or 2 after I got home for the summer, my father had a massive heart attack and passed away. About a week later, Mr. Parks called me. He didn't send a card. He called me to check in on me, to see if we needed anything. No other professor did that, no one from the university, but he did, because that is who he was. He knew us, and all these years later, that still means a lot to me. And here's the second story, captured on BandWagon's SpeakPipe voicemail tool.
This is John Cornyn, member of the UMass Marching Band from 2001 to 2004 and drum major for 3 of those years, from 2002 to 2004. Worked very closely with George Parks in a number of capacities and have 1,000 stories I could probably share about him and the influence he had on me and all of the folks I was in the band with, including Red Sox games he watched at my apartment in the dreaded 2003 series when they lost in 7 games to the Yankees, and the euphoric series in 2004 when they won for the first time in 86 years. I could share stories of him taking us out to Chili's for his loved queso appetizer with other drum majors and the leaders of the band, and all kinds of kidnappings and things of very fun sort. But I will share one of the most impactful stories is around a trip we took to New Jersey in 2003, I believe it was, and I learned that my grandmother had passed away during our time on this trip. He was very supportive in the moment while I was there, and I stayed on the trip and the shows that we did, but returned home after our trip and was asked to do the eulogy at my grandmother's service. He, unbeknownst to me, showed up, was a member of the crowd, and I only noticed him there when I was up giving the eulogy. And serendipitously, part of my eulogy was referencing My Way and how my grandmother led her life her way. And I quoted the song, and it was such a special moment to be saying what I said without knowing he would be there, and knowing that what I said was because of him and the influence he and the organization had on my life. It's an example of how, despite hundreds and thousands of individuals whom he had in the organization and whom he influenced over decades, that he did care deeply about each individual beyond their work in the band and as people and as humans. And I'm so grateful for his care for me in that moment and for the tremendous influence he had on my life. So hope this is a story to be shared, and very grateful to share it.
I'm thinking that all these stories will hopefully go a fair distance toward creating a mosaic that'll show you what George Parks was all about. There are, of course, more of them, about 33 years worth of stories just from the Amherst music world alone, but I am thankful for the folks who agreed to tell theirs. If there are any more hanging around out there needing to be told that you think the BandWagon listenership would get a kick or an appreciative sigh out of, my proverbial door is always open. After this next moment of repose, let me offer up a GNP story about a moment that can only happen if everybody deep down loves everybody else involved. And it involves F-bombs. Intrigued? Yeah, you are. Do stay with me. I think you will not be disappointed. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is a story that, in spite of an element of its subject matter, is suitable for family podcast listening. I promise. Band people are a diverse lot, and this diversity includes what they find funny, or more specifically, the ways they express that humor. Some love practical jokes, others don't. Some indulge in profanity, although hopefully not in uniform, thank you. Others do not. This story is about both in various ways. Another thing this story is about is the deployment of a devilish practical joke by people who nonetheless admire, respect, and love the person upon whom the joke is being dropped. Bit of context. The location was the Drum Major Academy Summer Clinic in Westchester, Pennsylvania. The year was either 2000 or 2001, so either my second or third year with DMA. Early in that clinic week, in a moment away from students, the staff had been gathered around someone's cassette player or equivalent, listening to and howling with laughter at a recording that one of the staff members had found recently. It was called The Most Versatile Word. The piece was about 2.5 minutes of a very dignified voiceover describing the many uses of what we all most likely know as the F word. Do not worry, dear listener, if you are inclined to worry. I will not speak that word myself, and I will bleep out the word very soon. This was the recording we were all listening to.
Perhaps one of the most interesting words in the English language today is the word f***. Out of all of the English words that begin with the letter F, f*** is the only word that is referred to as the F word. It's the one magical word. Just by its sound can describe pain, pleasure, hate, and love. As most words in the English language, is derived from German, the word frichen, which means to
me and to a number of my colleagues, it was that much funnier because of the musical accompaniment to the essay, which was music from the string orchestra suite The Four Seasons by the Italian Baroque composer Antonio Vivaldi. Our fearless leader, George Parks, was among the DMA staff gathered around the cassette player, and he was laughing at least as hard as any of the rest of us. At a couple of other moments during the early part of the week, he would cross paths with one or a few of us, and one of us would hum, and everyone would crack up afresh. Which, of course, got someone on staff thinking and scheming. Later in the week, we began one post-dinner work session with our DMA students out on the Westchester University practice field we regularly used. The first activity was Mr. Parks demonstrating a new parade command calling skill, which the students were then going to practice on their own, accompanied by pre-recorded music played over our portable sound system. One of our staff members, I believe it was a University of Delaware band section leader named Justin McAdams, was assigned to operate the music player, which contained all the music we used throughout the week for marching and conducting demonstrations and practice. So, Mr. Parks finished his demonstration of the column turn visual command and said, "Hey, everybody up." The students got up from where they had been sitting with their squads. Mr. Parks turned to the staff member holding the music player, which was attached to the PA system, and said, "Music, please, Justin." And Justin complied. What Mr. Parks and the rest of the clinic expected to hear was this. What we heard, though, was this. And Mr. Parks panicked. For reasons which I trust are clear, but just in case it needs saying, he would have preferred that the DMA students, aged 15 to 17, not hear about the many uses of the F word, nor would he have preferred that the whole city of Westchester hear about it either. I'd never seen him panic before. I had known him at that point for 17 years. In public situations or private, I had never seen him just freak out. It was as remarkable a sight and sound as you would expect with anyone who, as they say, leads with a heart of fire, but with a head of ice. This is about what it sounded like as Mr. Parks moved with a purpose toward Justin. Hold it. Stop. Justin. Stop music. By this time, though, the Vivaldi had continued on for what seemed like an eternity, but just long enough to reveal that Justin was in fact playing a recording of Vivaldi's Four Seasons, unadorned by any verbal commentary. So all you heard was the Vivaldi, and the sound of an entire DMA staff falling over laughing. The students, obviously, were mystified. Mr. Parks was, red-faced and now gently amused as his blood pressure went back down again, and as he realized two important things. One, he'd been pranked pretty good, and good-naturedly, and two, he was not going to be fired. And now, anytime I or anyone from the Westchester DMA staff of that year hear the beginning of Vivaldi's Four Seasons, the Spring Movement, we are immediately transported back to that Pennsylvania field and to that early 2000s time. And we laugh. And the people around us might be mystified. But it's okay, we get the joke, and it wasn't just a great practical joke, it was a great practical joke that led to an experience that we shared during a fine time spent together with fine people, doing the work and having the fun, and we'll always remember it. That's band, pretty much. Well, not always the practical joke, but the rest of it. And sometimes the practical joke. And it was also one of those times when, well, we got George good. And in that moment, to paraphrase one of my stories from the trio section, all of us, including George, we were into humor. Okay, one last pause to recover from that, and then I'll finish this week's episode with one more perspective on the life and legacy of George N. Parks. Thanks for continuing to listen. To wrap up this week, let's take the CODA. For the CODA this week, I had plans to quote portions of a blog post that I wrote 10 years ago when George Parks' passing was still a pretty raw memory for a lot of folks who knew him. Different people go through the stages of grief at different velocities, And there was one group of people who were mourning his loss from a different perspective than any of the people from whom you have heard in this episode. A very different perspective from anyone who knew Mr. Parks personally or had seen him at work, whether in a football stadium or on an auditorium stage or wherever. That group consisted of summer drum major clinic students who had never experienced George Parks live and in person. True, they had been instructed by people who operated in much the same fashion as George Parks did, so they got enough of an idea of what he might have been like, but even some of those DMA staff people had themselves never met him. And yet, remarkably, that didn't seem to matter. That didn't seem to hinder them acquiring a very accurate understanding of what the man was all about. So, at the end of the summer of 2014, mid-September arrived, and a lot of us were again trying to work out just what sort of social media tip of the cap we were going to post. Meanwhile, members of that group of people who had no personal experience of George Parks were creating posts of their own on the subject, based solely on their DMA experiences. And, well, you may judge for yourself, but when I read them, I thought, yep, they know. They really did get the idea. But instead, I'm going to read portions of an email that I received this week from a DMA student named Lucas Garcia. He attended this past summer's DMA clinic at Westfield State University, most of 14 years after George Parks passed away. He wrote this. While I haven't been lucky enough to ever meet George Parks in person, I was 3 at the time of his death, I've been fortunate enough to experience the legacy of his teachings through the Drum Major Academy this past summer. It goes without saying that band kids are a special kind of weird, the best kind. I think this story encapsulates that perfectly. If I recall correctly, we had just finished lunch at the Westfield Dining Hall, and me and one of the many friends I made there were waiting for some of our other friends to finish using the bathroom. While we waited, another group of people walked by. I wasn't sure exactly what they were discussing, but as soon as they were within earshot, the first thing I heard from their conversation was the attention command, "Detail, attend, hut." I'm unsure if the person was talking about the command itself, or how someone else had administered it, or something completely different. I am 100% certain, however, that the person who said it was not attempting to call anyone in particular to attention, rather they were just using it in plain old conversation. That being said, the next part may be fairly obvious. I don't recall if this was actual instinct, or rather one of my many, usually unsuccessful, attempts to initiate laughter, but the one thing I do recall clearly is that I snapped quickly to attention with one of the louder huts I had produced that camp. Immediately, everyone present started dying of laughter. I am almost certain everyone nearby heard us all laughing, and we probably, definitely, got some stares as well from said people, wondering what in the world was going through our heads. It was awesome. But once the laughing had died down after a while, one of the people who we'd been laughing with, who was actually my squad mate, hello Ava in Squad 11, said a line that has still stuck with me to this day. "We're all such band kids." Or something like that. As is the case with many things for me, going into that camp, I was unsure of whether or not I belonged in a group like this. Looking back, I didn't really have much reason to, as I had been drum major of our band the year before, and anyone who knows me would say that I was the biggest band kid they knew. Yet, despite that, I had some trouble feeling like I was supposed to be there at all. Was I a good enough drum major? Would I fit in? Would everyone there think of me as weird and hate me and crush me between a pair of cymbals and eat me for dinner the next day? All those questions, well, maybe not the last one, rang throughout my mind that entire camp, until I heard those words, that we were all such band kids. And it was only then that I finally felt worthy of that title. I felt accepted, and that I could actually put a positive impact on the lives of others, even if just for a moment. But most importantly, I was able to convince myself that yes, I was in the right place, both at DMA and in the world of band itself. If it weren't for George Parks and his creation of the camp, I would never have had that moment. I would never have gotten to meet so many amazing people who helped give me some of the best experiences of my life, and I would never have gotten to know that they're a lot more like me than I thought. With the experiences at DMA I had, I became a much better and more confident drum major, and I got to experience the true impact that marching band could have on not only people, but the world. Thank you, George. Thank you, Lucas. And I second that motion. Lots of people do. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host, this week with assistance from a whole lot of people. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at the BandWagon website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback. Let me know what you like and what you think might change. You can do that using the email address heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Or leave a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that I may include your message on the podcast unless you say otherwise. Those contact links and links to our news items and conversation topics can be found in our show notes. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoyed this podcast, get someone else to listen as well. Word of mouth is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with the pod every week, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. And please rate and review. It really helps other people to find the show. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton, and I hope you'll join me again.